Now, the last piece of this day is about talent. You remember I started with the highest correlation to cost is talent. We've talked many times about each piece of this program, the barrier is talent, cultural talent. And earlier this year, we did a talent survey where we had 600 respondents of talent. And I'm going to invite my panel to the stage as they get mic'd. I deliberately picked this panel for diversity. Kristine is on the cusp of being a millennial. She's been at a couple of companies. And she has a passion for women and diversity and changing organizations. Razat is a technologist that I have lots of respect for. He is very steeped in the industry for planning. He is Gen X, and one of the things you'll find is that individuals in technology companies are far more satisfied than in manufacturing. Kristine Mauro from Kellogg has a lot of passion for this. She worked at Procter & Gamble, then worked at Kellogg, and has a lot of passion for the differences in cultures. And Krkoska, who comes from Dow, has a baby boomer kind of perspective, if I can say that, Joe, and has been working on building teams at Dow. So when we think about talent, just to let them mic, you know, we've got different generations, and the baby boomers like myself are retiring. And we did this study where we looked at where are we in terms of satisfaction against these particular demographics. And one of the things that I found really interesting in this study is academics are happier than manufacturers, and vendors or technologists are happier than manufacturers, and baby boomers are more satisfied than Gen X and millennials. So with that, I'm going to bring my panel to the stage, if you guys are all mic'd. Kristine says, get going. Okay. And my first question to you guys is...
We need another chair.
We need another chair. Okay, we're going to get another chair. It's coming. We can make that happen.
Sorry, he wants me over here.
Okay.
Over here.
Okay, all right, okay. You're going to have the men on one side and the women on the other. Yeah. Two Kristines next to each other.
This is not going to be good.
This will be
So Razat, tell the group a little bit about yourself, and then tell me why you think people in technology have a higher satisfaction rate than people in manufacturing.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, you're great.
About myself, I've been in the supply chain domain now, like Laura mentioned, for about 25 years across management consulting, software technologies at Ernst & Young, I2, JDA, and now I'm just trying to relearn everything that Laura has taught me over the years. So I'm doing some advisory work and very active in the tech space around investments, around early stage innovation-oriented companies.
So why do you think the technologists have a higher satisfaction rate than the manufacturers?
Yeah, you know, I think it's all relative, but I think one thing that the technology companies have done is invest in their people and invest in training, and a lot of the training is not just product or systems related training. A lot of that training also ends up being process oriented training, and together with all the training comes visibility and early access to newer capabilities, right? A lot of times the technology companies are getting exposure to those new capabilities well before it actually goes out into the industry. And that creates a lot of excitement, which I think as professionals we all want to get. I think that the last element here is, I think in technology-oriented companies you have a lot more of a cross-functional background of skill sets. What I mean by that is you've got people who are computer scientists, you've got industrial engineers, you've got classic MBAs, and those three dimensions are so critical in the way we manage supply chains and we think about supply chains. Not in every organization do you find that blend. I think those are some examples of why I think you may find that to be the trend.
So Joe, tell the group a little bit about yourself, and why do you think baby boomers are happier than millennials or Gen X?
I represent all baby boomers.
All baby boomers.
So I've been with Dow Chemical for 34 years. Chemical engineering is my background, and I started in R&D, spent time in manufacturing, capital construction, and now supply chain. You know, I think it's probably because we have a longer runway, and life has been good. You know, I mean, you look at your data and the progress of industry over time. You look at Bob Gordon's presentation this morning, and we all enjoyed that nice rising curve. And so it feels pretty good from our vantage point. You compare that to a millennial who kind of started with a lot of immediacy, instant gratification. And I think they don't have the long runway to understand where it was and where it is, and they like immediate satisfaction and results. And maybe they see us, baby boomers, and they're not so sure that they like how hard we work. And they prefer to have more balance. And that's, I don't think that's a bad thing. And I actually think that digitization can be a part of maybe recalibrating that.
So Kristine, you're on the cusp of being a millennial. What does this data say to you? Tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am actually squarely in the middle of Generation X.
Okay.
But I have children who are millennials
Okay.
and whatnot. You know, I think it's kind of multifaceted. I think for me, I grew up in the middle between these, kind of sandwiched between these two groups. What I really see in millennials, and I don't think it's so much that they're dissatisfied as they've come into this manufacturing world where nothing has changed in the last 20 years. It's very stale. It doesn't match with what they do in everyday life. You know, I think the lack of technology, the lack of keeping up with technology is very dissatisfying to that group. So I think when we talk about 2030 and really advancing B2B, it really is about moving to where that generation wants us to be. Because that's what they're used to. They're used to being on their phones. They're used to having things be plug and play. They're very used to things being visual and graphical, and spreadsheets don't work for them, right? I had 2 interns this summer. I can get them to do analysis in Tableau. They absolutely hate Excel spreadsheets, right? So I just think it's a different style for them as opposed to what I see with the baby boomers, which they're very structured and things are, you know, they move at this kind of slow pace and
That's right, Joe.
Sorry, Joe. I mean, like the speed of business.
I thought it was
just
hard work and it's, it's a slow pace.
It's just the speed of business has increased, and I think the millennials are, that's what they're used to. That's what they want.
Yeah. Now, Kristine, when I published this article, you called me because you wanted to talk about the female voice in supply chain. How do you see women in supply chain and the evolution, and why do you think we don't see higher satisfaction?
Yeah, I mean, I started a long time ago. I'm on the cusp of baby boomer Gen X. So I've been in industry for in my 32nd year, so quite a few years. And I've watched at the beginning a very strong push on diversity. I came in like many millennials feel right now, like I can do anything and I can go anywhere and I can be anything that I can be. And I quickly realized that wasn't true. It was not true at all. And that all of those glass ceilings, they existed, and they still do. And we've raised them a level or two, but we haven't eliminated them yet. And so that's part of the feeling of being dissatisfied, is because I would have hoped after almost 32 years, that the glass ceilings would be completely eliminated. And They're not. And so I think that's where women, and the other thing I would say is that the barriers you're facing are more under the carpet and under the tables. So they're not as blatant as when I started. They're not the in my face telling me, you're the age of my daughter and I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say. I heard those things when I started. You don't hear that today, but there are still people that feel that way. And so you're getting this subtle, you know you're not getting the support you need, but it's not blatant and it's not out there, and so you're not feeling supported. And so it makes you feel incredibly dissatisfied with what's going on, but there's nothing you can do about it because it's not something you can go address. So I think that makes even people today feel more dissatisfied. Women today feel more dissatisfied than when I was in it, and at least I could go address it.
So Razat, of these 4 people, you're the happiest, right? You're the Gen X, you're the technologist, right? You know, you're surrounded by folks that aren't so happy, you know? But one of the things we see is that many organizations invest in new hires, or what I'm going to call high potentials. But that the big gap in supply chain is this mid-management brain that we've got to really build. What are your thoughts there, Razat? I mean, how many organizations have you worked with in your tenure, and how do you feel about this gap?
Yeah. You know, I think if we step back and first question, what is the scope of supply chains? And if I look at 10 companies, even though they may be in the same industry or the same region, they all have different definitions of what constitutes the supply chain organization. So I think that's the first spot. We as an industry have not done a very good job of defining that. But when you get past that, what role does, you know, what is the organization model that follows that scope? And based on that organization model, what is the role of management, right? And so when you come to middle management, you're right. There sets in a sense of complacency sometimes, that you know what you've been doing because you've been doing it for 10 years, maybe 15 years. But that's where I think there's also a gap in what is available in the industry for training for these middle management folks, right? You don't have as many programs in the universities, and the ones that exist are fairly high level. You know, can they really be operationalized? The technology companies, I don't think, are doing we haven't done a very good job of reaching out and orienting training and enablement for that middle management. The training that the technology companies provide are very product-centric,
yes.
User-centric. So there's a big gap, and the question becomes, what do we do about it? And that's where I think there needs to be some collaboration between academic institutions. I'm not sure what role APICS is going to play here. That's an open question. And the technology companies, because I think the technology companies have a very important role to play in supply chain 2030. Right,
absolutely.
So I think there'll have to be some collaborative effort to create joint programs for that middle management under the construct of that broader organization and definition of the supply chain.
Yeah, you know, I show this slide a lot, and we do our cross-company academy, which is an online academy, and they're middle managers, and they say, we're stuck. We really want our leaders to take this course because we can't influence them. Joe, what are your thoughts? How do we solve this gap?
Well, you know I've cycled on this.
I do.
When
So tell the
Laura
group the
first
cycle.
suggested that we had a talent shortage, I disagreed, because I didn't think we had a talent shortage. And in terms of intellect, I don't think we do. But then I started to listen a little deeper, and do we have a middle management gap? Yes, I think we do, but I actually think there's 2 pieces of really good news there. I think if we had a high availability of what we traditionally called middle managers, I'm worried that they would actually become a hurdle to progress, because we humans don't like change as much as maybe we'd like to or should. And so I think maybe the absence could be a good thing, because it actually gives a lot of opportunity to the younger folks in the organization to develop faster, maybe a little faster than we think by our old models. But the good news is they're going to bring a breath of fresh air and pull this technology in faster than it otherwise would have changed.
Okay, Kristine, your thoughts. Let's go with Barnhart first. Kristine Barnhart. It's bad that you guys set the two Kristines by each other. Yeah.
You know, I think from what I see, one of the big issues is that we've forgotten that there's a difference between management and leadership. And, you know, I was lucky. I came in, you know, when Gita was talking to me, it spoke to my heart, because I came in to business at engineering school in the mid-90s when globalization was really at its peak. And I think at that point in time, things were growing so fast that you couldn't just have functional managers. You had to find leaders in the organization that were able to manage beyond their skill set. And I think we've become really complacent. We now want to promote within these very, very deep functional expertise. And by doing so, we miss out on really great leaders and people that are able to be charismatic and to motivate their teams and to support their teams and to, you know, make progress. And they're so mired in what they know functionally. And I think that's also one of the hurdles then with employing new processes and new technologies. And because, you know, I am a supply chain manager, and I know supply chain. And I've never been at a supply chain, and I don't understand maybe operations or customer service, or, you know, so I feel like there's a leadership question that we need to ask.
Now, Kristine, when you and I engaged, you talked about the differences in the two organizations you've worked in about building talent in this mid-management. Can you kind of crystallize that for us?
Yeah, I think, you know, that I worked at P&G, which is a promote from within company. And so they recognized that they weren't going to be bringing in people from the outside to fill a gap somewhere, that they didn't have that capability. And so there was a bigger focus on getting you more well-rounded in supply chain. So getting you roles in different areas of supply chain. And so, you know, I know in my career I worked in every area of the supply chain that you could work in. And so you got that opportunity to do that, because knowing that in order to build that talent and to get those middle managers and to get those executive levels, you had to build them and you had to create them. So there was a much more focus on building talent, building skills and capabilities, looking for leaders that could then lead. And so there was more of a focus. Whereas as I've gone to Kellogg, it's a different approach of, if we don't have the person in line, if we don't have the talent, we go hire, which is a perfectly good approach. But there's less focus than on building those skills and capabilities of people in the organization. And so I think that's where some of that dissatisfaction and that lack of skill in middle management happens, is the fact that people aren't being developed, their skills aren't being, we're using them as functional experts. We're keeping people in functional expert roles. And then we go out and find those leaders and we bring people in, and people that expect that they would get that next level aren't getting it, because we haven't developed them. And so I think it's really important that we really pay attention to those middle managers and those people and develop them.
So, Joe, one of the issues in next generation thinking is really building tactics that work. Have you been able to determine a tactic that works for that mid-management to build next generation thinking?
It's not new. It's not rocket science, and I think it's proven. You know, when you talk to companies that are rated well at doing exactly that, I think there's some common elements that are seen. And one is this 70-20-10 idea, that 70% of adult learning happens through doing. And so you have to get people the right developmental experiences. And so one of the things that we do in Dow and Dow AgroSciences is we have, at each level of the organization, we have people reviews on a monthly basis. And the idea is just making sure that what they view as their career path flanges up against what we as leaders are designing as the organizational needs of the future, and we look for matches there all the time, and we try and keep people moving quite a bit. So if I had to pick one most important thing, I'd go with that 70 piece and say planned strategic movement of every person in the organization so that by the time they get to that leadership role or that management role, they've actually had experiences across different sectors of supply chain.
Razat, what's the tactic that you think works to get at this next generation thinking and talent development?
Yeah, I think I agree with every panelist. I mean, I think that cross-functional rotation and experience is critical because in supply chains we have a lot of connectivity, interconnectedness, dependencies, and so if you're able to rotate across, you know, S&OP functions versus transportation versus warehousing, in the retail world with store operations, I think those are very good things. And even beyond supply chain, you know, the lines are fusing with sales and marketing, for example, right? There's such a huge dependency, especially in CPG companies, between, you know, what the account teams do and what the supply chain organization does. So that rotation is very important. I think beyond that, there are some good examples where there's a dedicated effort to let the middle managers try new things, right? And that creates excitement. It brings new talent to the table. It also pushes the status quo, right? And so, you know, I heard from Schneider Electric earlier this afternoon how there's a dedicated effort, for example, to try out things with blockchain. That's fantastic.
Isn't that great?
That's fantastic. I have to say, in my experience, less than 5% of companies actually do those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think about 7, and you know, Annette Clayton actually called me up to say, you know, how could that evolve, and I'm so excited to see that evolve at Schneider.
And that's liberating, it's exciting, it develops people, it, you know, it brings in new talent supply chain. I mean, supply chain needs to be more sexy. Right? It was back in the mid-90s.
Yeah, it was mid-90s. Well, I mean, not that you guys aren't sexy, right? By and large. But, you know, it was cool, right? In the 1990s, it was a cool place to be, and now people say, supply chain, it's kind of the dirty word, right? You know, it's not much fun anymore, right?
We need to change that, and I really think that you touched on something that is very important. I still don't think the boardrooms in many organizations really understand what is supply chain management and what is the strategic impact to shareholder value. And you know, you talk about training, enablement, education. I think we need to do a better job of educating the boardroom.
I do too. But we also have another challenge. We're just immersed in all these new technologies, right? Hadoop, Kafka, Spark, you know, and you know, you talk this language and people are like, yada, yada, what's that mean? How does the business leader really learn that so that they're fluent in some of these new technologies?
Yeah. The crazy part is I don't think anyone can claim they know everything.
Right.
Things are so fluid. Things are evolving so rapidly. Any consultant or technology company or, you know, and I'm sure you'll identify with this, Laura, we're all learning our way through this.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We talk about the third industrial revolution or the fourth one or the fifth one, whatever it is, we're in that process right now. So things are very fluid. So what does a supply chain leader do, or what does an executive do? I really think you have to try out. It goes back to what Joe was saying. You've got to have the capacity, you have to make budgets available to try new things, to experience new things and see how those apply to your business. Do they really solve a business pain or not? Because things will evolve, and gosh, right now we're talking about blockchain and AI. You know, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, we could be talking about something else. 10 years ago, we were talking about RFID.
Right.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Nobody talks about RFID anymore. So technology is not going to be standing still. There'll always be evolution, but you've got to try. You've got to make it specific to your business, and you've got to develop an appetite to innovate.
So, Kristine, Mauro, what tactics do you think work to kind of solve this next generation problem
Well, I think that
or opportunity?
Well, I mean, I think a couple things. I absolutely agree with somewhere along this path, we forgot that we are a competitive advantage for our companies, supply chain. And one, we haven't defined it clearly, so everybody has a different definition. So if we could clearly define this is what supply chain is, and then this is what we bring as our competitive advantage, and educate our leaders and our board of directors, then suddenly this becomes a sexy and a place to be again. It is a place that we are now a competitive advantage for our companies, and we're no longer just the cost-cutting leg of our companies. I think as businesses, especially CPG, where the top line is going down, it's not going up, what they look for supply chain to do is only cost-cutting. And they're not coming to us to saying, how can we grow our business? And so I do think we have to turn that story around and become a competitive advantage again. And then we start to attract the talent, and we start to attract the excitement, and we start to bring us back again.
Kristine, tactics that work for next generation capabilities?
I think in my experience, what I like companies that take a very measured approach to developing their talent, and that really means making sure that people have spent time in all of the functions, or that they've at least interacted with all of the functions. I think expats, it's disappointing that globalization is going down, because I still think there's wonderful value in moving your people from region to region, place to place. You share culture, you share best practice, you share different types of thoughts, and I think that that's really important in terms of a tactic. And then, beyond that, I think it's really partnering with our universities and academic institutions and making sure that we're the customer. So we talk about outside in. Even at the academic level, it needs to be outside in. Don't just push out people that have these check marks. Talk to me, find out what I need, because my needs are changing. I need somebody that has more technical expertise and has an understanding of the technologies out there, so they can train me. Because I think that's the other thing that we lose sight of as a leader or as a manager. If I hire good people, I don't have to know all of that. I don't have to know all of that technology. If I hire right people and I give them good objectives and they're getting results, they can teach me. I can trust them that they know, right? I don't have to know blockchain, because Brian knows it for me, and he can show me what to do. But so I think back to like the best managers that I worked for. They didn't understand the nuances. I was a double E. They were chemi. I was putting in motor control centers. She didn't have a clue. But man, she was a great leader, and she was supportive, and she helped me in those areas that were not functional or that were not technology or technically based. And we seem to have forgotten that.
So I'm going to brag on Kristine a little bit. When she first joined the network at Networks, she's been like a sponge learning stuff, right? And it's been great to see her learn. But one of the things that I think is an opportunity is not to be insular as an organization. Come to conferences, invest in learning, and help people grow. Questions for the panel. Time for a couple of questions. Andrea, Sam, can you bring Andrea the mic? And Anne, can you bring a mic here? Andrea? What's your question?
Sure. First, I have a comment from the baby boomer group.
Are you satisfied, Andrea?
I'll answer that later.
Okay, all right.
A comment and then a question. The first is just your comment around supply chain bringing sexy back. I think it's interesting because I look at all the buzz my 20-year-old has around Amazon. And she's like, oh, my God, I can't wait to work for Amazon. I said, well, it's a logistics company with an IT front attached to it. And they do transportation, they do warehousing, they do all the things that are in supply chain. And I think sometimes we don't market well, right? Because people will cut their arm off to go work for Amazon. I said, well, we do transportation. They do transportation. We do warehousing. They do warehousing. So it's just a matter, I think, of us being better marketers of what we do and the value that we add, whether it's to the boardroom and to our constituencies who are really our employees and our talent that we have. So that was my comment.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think we're still sexy.
I think that's really right, though. We're not good at marketing, even
Yeah.
when we have successes, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I think it's incumbent upon us all to make it sexy, right?
We got to bring sexy back. Okay, that was the tag for today, the third.
Yeah,
one.
the third one here.
The other question I have is, I'd love your thoughts around, if I put the commentary that we had about what does 2030 look like for supply chain, and then I marry it with the middle management question and how we're losing them and how we think about the engagement model or the gap. If 2030 really means it's automated and things, you push a button and your order comes through, really this need for talent looks incredibly different. And the need for what a manager looks like in the future state is incredibly different. I'd love your thoughts around how we measure, how we think about the conversations we had for the last 3 sessions with really what that new manager will look like. Because I heard the framework of work of what today's manager looks like. Really about the future manager, I think, is really the question we need to be addressing.
Yeah, and let's broaden that a little bit about future roles. What kind of future roles do you think we have, or future organizations? You know, I have a good friend who works in manufacturing. He says, my factory will be run by a guy in his PJs in his living room, right? One person. What do you think, you know, this next generation of talent looks like, Joe? New jobs and constructs?
I think, and I don't know if I'm speaking for multiple companies here, so I'll just talk about my own. I think we've got an organizational evolution that needs to happen. We have, if I equate this to the factory floor, we went through a learning process where as we instrumented those chemical plants or the packaging lines or whatever the case may be, we started having specialization of labor. If you think about how much digital we have introduced to the typical operation, but at least in my company, we don't have those equivalent of run plant engineers or technician advisors working on shift in the digital space the way we do in the other spaces. So I actually think we need to make an organizational design change. Someone earlier mentioned all the strategic partners in the room. And we have to have those skill sets infused and sitting side by side. So if I think of the people in my logistics team, at a certain point in time, we brought in third-party employees and sat them next to our core team. And all of a sudden, everything worked better. And I think we need to do that same thing with technology providers. We need to nest them within our organizations. And I think when you have data scientists and analysts and code writers right there understanding exactly what needs to be done and knowing how to do it, that will be a breakthrough and a step change in our organization effectiveness.
Yeah, but Joe, we've made buying technologies kind of a win-lose, right? Buy, sell. You know, we haven't really been able to partner with technologists. Razat, what are your thoughts there? You know?
I think this is a very important question, which is, what does the supply chain of the future look like? What is the organization model that needs to follow it? And hence, what are the skill sets? So let's just focus on the skill sets. I do think that the role of the technologist, and let's define what that is, you know, because even despite all the automation, all the machine learning, the data sciences, you still need people who understand how to model those algorithms. You still need people who know how to tune and understand the fundamentals of the business. So that's where the data sciences, operations research roles within the organization, working side by side with people who understand the operations, will become very critical, which I think goes along the lines of what you said. Those could be augmented with external third-party companies who are bringing those skill sets, or you'll have to develop them in-house, like an Amazon does, right? I think that the other aspect here is going to be, even though there's going to be a lot of automation, relationships in supply chains are not going to go away. Machines are not going to be able to manage your relationships, and we forget about that. You know, we can automate transactions, we can automate processes. I don't think we can automate relationships. So I think an important skill set of the future of the supply chain is going to include how you manage your relationships with your suppliers, with your carriers, with your outsourced contract manufacturers. And I think that's going to be a more important role in the future that we're looking at, the digital future we're looking at. The last thing that I'll say, along those lines in the future is we haven't talked much about sustainability at this conference, right? Remember we used to talk a lot about that 2 years ago, 3 years ago? No one is talking about that anymore. I think that's going to come back around. Mm-hmm. I think when we think about the supply chain of the future, we, especially with the next generation, that's a priority for the millennials, right? Yeah. And so that's going to come back around, and that's where I think the skill sets that industrial engineers bring with computer scientists and data scientists and the process and operational functions, I think there's going to be another dimension, which is going to be the biological dimension. I think supply chain is going to have an important impact and contribution that biologists can bring to the table in terms of how we adapt, how we impact different things in the environment. That's going to come back around. That hasn't gone away.
I absolutely agree, and I think that it's fascinating. We have CRM and SRM, which are all about relationship automation, and we've gone backwards on the ends of the supply chain because there is no relationship in CRM and SRM, right?
No.
Kristine, what's your response to Andrea's question?
Well, I think what's going to be really important is that intellectual curiosity. I think that having that for that supply chain of the future, you're going to be watching it. You're going to be watching data that comes in, and you're going to have access to more data than you've ever had before in your life. And you're going to have to develop insights out of that data, or the data is going to help you give you insights. And so your curiosity of understanding that and what it needs to do and what you need to learn from that is going to be more important than it's ever been before. And so I think that the other thing is I think the hierarchical structure isn't going to necessarily be helpful. I think that you're going to have, younger people that have the technology knowledge or the knowledge from the universities, and you're going to have the older people that have the operational experience and the knowledge from that. And we've got to break down the hierarchical structures that cause us not to talk to each other and not to get the ideas from those people and the ideas, and talk both ways. And so I think that combination of intellectual curiosity and that combination of breaking down those barriers has got to be that change. We have to create a network versus a hierarchy that works on problems.
Kristine, your thoughts?
I guess to follow with that, I see that. I had 2 interns that worked for me this summer, and they were absolutely amazing. They came in, they learned Tableau in about 3 days. They were writing SQL code, and they were looking at our data in a way that we had never looked at it before. And to your point, they didn't need me to tell them how to do that. But they did need me to help put the data into context and to help provide some guidance then on how to gain insights from that data, right? So they were very good at getting the data and presenting it to me in a way that I had never looked at it before. And there were certain things that jumped out, but then they didn't know what to do with it once it jumped out, right? So I think for me it was making sure that we're providing guidance, but we're not handcuffing or straitjacketing, right? We're providing some openness and some ability to kind of go in different directions and see what the data shows us. So, I think it's about being flexible and agile. We talk about that in terms of our supply chains, but that it really needs to reflect who we are as the supply chain professional. We need to be agile. We need to be flexible. We need to have an open mind. We need to be willing to experiment and be innovative and to be curious, right? And I think that if you look at that holistically, that means people are not in the same job for 20 years. how can you be curious in the same role for 20 years, right? Like, it means you need to move from business to business, even if you stay within the same company. It means we need to provide a mechanism for you to either go outside to be trained or get additional training inside. I mean, I think we need to get back to that point where we're supporting that curiosity and that innovation. And that's, to me, what's exciting about the millennials. And because they are challenging the status quo. Why do I have to be in this office for 9 hours a day? I have an intern that's working remotely. That is way, way futuristic for my company, right? But he's doing a great job. And when I try to manhandle him into a cubicle, he's like, yeah, it doesn't really work for me. But gosh, his results are great, and that's what should matter. So I feel like we, as the leaders in supply chain, we need to practice all the things that we're preaching.
Okay, last question.
I just want to say before I ask my question, I'm a millennial. If anyone
We
wants
love
to
you.
ask. Yeah, you're a
Yeah.
millennial. Okay. But I have a question, and I think actually the discussion we just had is a great preface to it, thinking about what the future manager looks like. So we talked a lot about rotations being really important, getting experience throughout the organization. So my question is very specific, is what do you think that length of rotation, the ideal length is? Is 9 months too short? Is a year too long? Like what does that look like? And how many different areas of the organization does a person need to experience for them to really get enough of that breadth?
So let me build on that. Kristine, Mauro, you've had very different experiences in this area, right? You've kind of had experiential learning in two very different organizations. What's your response there?
That's a good one, because I can talk about my personal experience. It was about a year and a half in different roles, and I would switch after about a year and a half and go do something different. That gave me enough time to learn, but didn't give me enough time to become an expert. But it did give me enough time to learn and to grow from there. I think you have to really, at some point though, decide, is there an area that I really do want to know more about and that I want to learn more about, and maybe spend some more time in there. But I think 9 months is pretty short for you to really learn. But I think 3 years, which some companies say every role has to be 3 years, and then it's too long. So if you really want to get that learning, how many different areas? Wow, that's a tough one. I think depending on how your supply chain is designed and defined, I would say get in every one of them or touch them in some way, and because they all work together. And the more that you can understand how they work, the better off you're going to be. But create your career path, look at your career path and see, depending on what you want to do and where you want to be, see which ones are the most critical. Don't miss one. I missed one, and it impacted me.
What'd you miss?
I missed plant manager. I was in manufacturing for 9 years, but at the time of plant manager, I went and took a different assignment, thinking I would come back and be a plant manager, but then I got promoted again. But that miss of plant manager was one of those critical checks that folks are like, well, gosh, you can't lead, this because you weren't a plant manager. And it's like,
So know what
wow.
those critical checks are.
Know what those are, and understand those in your company, and get them checked. Because you don't want to look back later and go, wow, I didn't get that checked, and now that's preventing me from being who I want to be.
Other thoughts, right tenure for job change?
I'll save us time. Ditto.
Okay.
I mean, that was such a comprehensive and aligned answer with at least our company. Same kind of same ideas.
Razat, are you ditto as well?
Yeah.
Ditto.
I mean, the only thing I'll add is, again, think about where things end and where things begin in terms of the boundaries. At P&G, for example, product supply has a certain definition. At Unilever, it may have a certain other definition, but supply chains are connected with other functions. So I would recommend don't bind yourself only to the supply chain definition. Think about finance, think about sales and marketing, because frankly, that'll make you a better supply chain professional by having some experience in those areas as well.
Kristine, are you ditto as well? Or
I guess the only caveat to that would be, I think it really depends upon the industry and or the segment and where you're working. And you know, so I think, you know, when I was at Whirlpool, I did 9 months in maintenance, and then I moved to process engineering. You know what? 9 months in maintenance was enough. It was a great introduction on second shift. You know, so I think it depends. The other thing is, if you're going to work in a manufacturing-based company, I think you should get your hands dirty at least once, right? Now, whether that's maintenance engineering or a process or a supervisor role or, you know, managing, you know, supervisor or managing in the warehouse, but something that puts you really close to the floor, where you're not sitting in an office and you probably have on, you know, crappy clothes because they get dirty every day. But I think that that's important. There's some really valuable learnings there. And I see a lot of people coming out of college directly into the cubicle farm, and they don't do that tour where they get dirty, and they check off all the other boxes, but man, there's a lot to learn. The closer you are to the hourly folks, they can just teach you so much.
Well, let's give my panel a hand. Thank you.